Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name's Brina. If you don't know me, I am a huge true crime buff. I'm just very baffled by the fact that people can kill other people, and I just don't understand how their brain works. So I've always wanted to learn more, and I also love doing my makeup, so let's just go ahead and combine the two. And before I even start, I know I'm not the first one to do this, and I don't really know what else to say here, so let's just get on with our serial killer of the day. So today we're going to be talking about Robert Bob Hansen, aka the Butcher Baker. And the reason he got the name the Butcher Baker is because he was a baker who was also a serial killer. And I found this story very intriguing, and I thought that he would be the right one to start this series with. So, a little bit about Robert as a child. He was born on February 15th, 1939 in Esterville, Iowa, to Danish immigrants. His parents' names were Christian and Edna Hansen, and his father was a baker, and obviously he would eventually teach Robert everything he knew about baking, and Robert would eventually follow in his father's footsteps, but the two didn't really have much in common. I honestly don't know how Robert ended up becoming a baker like his father. I think it was what he knew and he was good at, so he just followed in his father's footsteps. His dad was very domineering and had a very old school way of thinking when it came to disciplining a child, so the two would clash a lot in that regard, and Robert was just very afraid of his father, and the two could never really seem to find common ground except for when they were hunting. They both shared a very large passion, a large love for hunting, and so it was something that the two would often do together. When Robert was 10 years old, his family moved to Pocahontas, Iowa, where they would essentially set down roots, and his father opened up his bakery. That is where Robert would spend the rest of his adolescent life. Robert was, we're gonna call him Bob because that's what he liked to go by. So while growing up, Bob was a very unpopular kid. He was described as shy, quiet, and a loner, and he also had a lot of acne and a stutter, so he was very often bullied. Why kids gotta be so mean? And because of the acne and his stutter, girls just never showed any interest in him. I also read that Bob was left-handed, but he was always forced to use his right hand, which in turn made his stutter worse, and therefore he was picked on more because of the stutter. It just seems like he did not have the best life. I mean, definitely not the worst life by any means, but his parents didn't really seem to have a lot of money, and he just didn't seem to have any friends growing up ever. And then after Bob graduated from high school, he joined the United States Army Reserve and was discharged after just 1 year of service. While he was in the service, he finally lost his virginity to a prostitute. And this experience would be one that would completely shape Bob's future relationships with women and prostitutes especially. He did not like that he was paying for the services and the prostitute was in charge and it went how she wanted it to go. And he stated, quote, "I think that was part of the reason. I figured that if a person was paying for it, they should be in the driver's seat." After Bob was discharged, he went back home to Pocahontas, and this is when things really started to go south for him. When Bob moved back to Pocahontas, he became an assistant drill instructor at a police academy there, and during this time he met and married his first wife in the summer of 1960, but that marriage would be extremely short-lived because on December 7th of 1960, Bob was arrested for arson. He had burned down the school bus barn because he said that he associated the word school with people always making fun of him, and he just hated the word so much he wanted to do anything he could to get back at the school. He convinced himself the school had wronged him and he wanted to get back at it. Bob was given a 3-year prison sentence for the arson, but he was released after serving only 20 months. While he was in prison, his wife divorced him after just 6 months of marriage, and his parents were so ashamed by his actions that they sold the bakery and moved to Minnesota, where they would buy a resort. I find that very telling about his parents, that they absolutely would not stand by their son to the extent where they were willing to flee the state. I think that says a lot about their relationship with him. Although Bob's prison stint wasn't entirely a bad thing for him, in my opinion, because while he was in prison, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder with periodic schizophrenic episodes. And I believe he was ordered to take medication at this time, though it's believed he never actually took the medication. After Bob was released from prison, he spent the summer of 1962 in Minnesota at his parents' resort. And while he was there, he met and fell in love with Darla Henriksen, and they got married, and they had a few seemingly good years of marriage before Robert suggested that the couple move to Alaska in 1967. He said that he had always dreamed of going to Alaska to hunt and fish ever since he read of America's Last Frontier in books as a child. So this had always been a dream of his, and Darla agreed that maybe moving to Alaska would not be the worst thing for the couple, so they moved there, and the couple had 2 children, and this is where Bob would eventually open his own bakery. He was described by his neighbors in Alaska as being very well liked, and he was even deemed a local hunting champion. He set some records for hunting. I don't know what. I didn't really look into that too much, but after he was arrested and deemed a serial killer, they took away those records, so he no longer holds any of the records. Shortly after they moved to Alaska, Robert found himself getting into some trouble again. He described that his favorite after-work activity would be to go downtown and look at the women, because shortly after the Hansens moved to Alaska, the oil boom hit there, so there were a lot of scandalous women coming to the state. It's said that there was an organization based out of Seattle that would recruit women to dance at various places around the country. They were told that if they joined this organization, they would basically be living a life of luxury, and that they would get to travel from Seattle to Alaska and Hawaii, where they would dance at various clubs. These women were also told that their expenses would be paid for, including their hotel and their flights. But then once the women got to Alaska, they basically realized they had been duped. They were put up in a really seedy motel where all they had was a mattress provided for them. And then they were told that not only were they basically stuck here now, that in order to make a living dancing, they would have to pay to dance at these clubs. So a percentage of their wages would go to owners or whoever, and they were not making anywhere near as much money as they were promised. So let that be a lesson, ladies. Never ever trust a man when he tells you you can live a life of luxury if you follow him. So many of these women turned to the streets and were prostituting themselves, and this is where Robert would frequent. He would frequent not only these topless clubs, but the streets where the prostitutes were. And on November 11th, 1971, Robert went after who we can only assume would be his first victim. On this day, he saw 18-year-old Susan Heppard, and he followed her home and asked her if she would go on a date with him, claiming that he was new to the area, and Susan declined, and that would seemingly be the end of it for her. But then 11 days later, Robert came back, this time with a gun, and tried to kidnap her. But Susan was not going to go quietly, and she screamed, alerting her roommates that clearly something was not right out there, and her roommates called the cops, and Robert fled the scene, but Susan was able to give police a very detailed description of his car. So within 30 minutes, cops had located Robert's car and arrested him. After his arrest, 32-year-old Robert Hansen was released on bail awaiting his trial date, and less than a month later, Robert went downtown and kidnapped Patricia Roberts at gunpoint and drove her 160 miles away from Anchorage to a cabin near the Kenai Peninsula where he raped her. And it's believed that Robert intended on murdering her, but her being his first victim, he wasn't really sure what to do with her once he got her out there. So Patricia was able to to convince him to bring her back to Anchorage. But on the way there, he came up with this idea to stop the car and tell her to get out and run. He pointed his mini Ruger rifle at her and told her to run. Patricia then begs him not to kill her, and he agrees after taking down the names and addresses of all of her family who lived in Anchorage, threatening that if she went to police, he would kill all of her family. So obviously Patricia is terrified by this and believes that he would kill her family. She's seen how crazy he is. She goes home and tries to pretend like nothing happened. But then just days after Patricia's run-in with Robert, reports of a nude female college student had been found in a ravine near the Kenai Peninsula. So Patricia fears that Robert may be struck again. So she went to police to tell them her story, her encounter with Robert. She is able to pick Bob out of a photo lineup. So police go back and bring Bob back down to the police station, and Bob denies the whole entire allegation, basically. He denies everything that Patricia has told police that he did to her. Bob was deemed an upstanding member of society. He even had his minister come and testify for him. And at this point, police decide that they believe Bob over Patricia, who is a known drug addict and a prostitute. So they basically tell him, hey, if you agree to this plea deal in the Susan Hepburn case, we'll drop all charges against you in the Patricia Roberts case. So obviously Bob agrees to this. And on March 24th, 1972, Bob receives a 5-year sentence for assault with a deadly weapon in the Susan Hepburn case. And his wife and children stand by him through this. During this time, his wife fully supported the family financially. She was a very intelligent lady. She had a master's degree in education and she taught special needs children, and she was also extremely religious, which I think that is her guiding factor in staying with him for all the years that she did, because most religions, it's very frowned upon to get divorced, and she just thought that going to church with her would save him. So Darla stood by him through his prison sentence. Honestly, I really don't know why she stayed with him. And Bob would learn one thing in particular from this prison sentence, and that was always choose his victims wisely. Clearly, Susan Hepburn, who was a regular upstanding member of society, police believed her. And when it came to Patricia Roberts, who was a known prostitute and a drug addict, police did not believe her. So this taught Robert that he should only go after prostitutes and drug addicts and other people who will not be believed. This is really a catalyst in what would become his ability to fly under the radar for as long as he did. And then after Bob gets out of prison, he once again gets arrested in 1977 for stealing a chainsaw. Although it is believed that Robert began killing around 1973, nobody really knows for sure the exact date. It's guessed that it was around 72 or 73. His very first victim's body would not be found until July 17th of 1980, when electrical workers found a female body about 28 miles north of Anchorage, which is where Bob lived, if I forgot to mention that, in Eklutna, Alaska. And this victim would later be known as Eklutna Annie. Eklutna Annie? I don't know if I'm saying that right. Eklutna Annie, because they would never be able to identify her. Even after doing a facial reconstruction and sending this image out, police are never able to identify this woman, and to this day, her identity still remains unknown. Bob would later claim that he told this woman he would take her home. He also does not remember her name, but he would later claim that he told her he would take her home, but instead he took her up Eklutna Road where he murdered her. He claims that she ran from him and he grabbed her by the hair and pulled a buck knife out of her purse, but it is very largely speculated that the purest joy Robert got from murdering his victims was unleashing them into the wilderness naked, and he would then pursue after them with his .223 Ruger mini rifle and a buck knife, so we can only assume that's what actually happened to her. Cause of death would be determined to be a stab wound to the body. Less than 1 month later, another body was found, this time outside of Seward. The body was found badly decomposed in a gravel pit. Police were not able to link the body to Robert for 2 more years. So fast forward to September 12th of 1982, an Anchorage police officer and his friend are out hunting moose along the Knik River when they discovered they weren't really sure what it was at first. It just seemed to be a pile of clothes. There was a rip in the jeans, and the police officer pulled back the jeans and saw skin, so he knew that they had found a body. There was an ace bandage wrapped around the head, so the officer found this very suspicious. So he called out the rest of the police department and they began searching the area, and they would later identify the body as 24-year-old Sherry Morrow, who had gone missing a year earlier. Sherry was a topless dancer at one of the clubs that Robert frequented, and her roommate would later disclose that she had also had her own encounter with Robert, where he had asked her if she would like to go on his plane with him, and she said no because she got a bad feeling from him. Always trust your gut because it's usually not wrong. Sherry would later tell her roommate that she had a date with Robert and that he was going to take her on his plane. She was so excited because she saw this as her way of meeting a good boyfriend, somebody who had money and could get her out of this life that she really did not want to be in. Sherry was found with 3 gunshot wounds to her back, but there were no bullet holes through her clothes, so it's assumed that she was murdered naked and later clothed. So that once again puts in the theory of Robert liking to hunt the women naked like animals. He's just so creepy. I forgot to mention, Robert has a plane of his own. I vaguely mentioned it with Sherry, but he had owned his own little plane that he would use to fly out to hunt. This is what he had told his wife. Supposedly, he made a false insurance claim that he would later be charged with, but those charges would be dropped. He made a fake claim that he had lost some of his big game trophies. He used the insurance money to buy this little private airplane that would become the hub of his murders, basically. So on April 24th, 1983, Robert brought Paula Golding to his meat shack along the Knik River. This is what he referred to it as with her, was a meat shack. It is where he would butcher his big game after his kill. He would later realize that calling it a meat shack was not the wisest decision when talking to women, because he's creepy, taking them to a secluded area, to a meat shack. Clearly, women are gonna be scared. The whole way to his meat shack, he could sense that Paula was very frightened, and he kept trying to reassure her that he was going to take her home when this was all over, that he just wanted to have fun with her, and it was all going to be alright, but clearly Paula knew better. After they arrived at the meat shack, Bob noticed another plane flying over, and this frightened him. He was very afraid of being caught with Paula there because she was very clearly distraught. She no longer wanted to be there with him. She just wanted him to take her home. So he took her into the meat shack and handcuffed her to the bar where he would hang the meat from, and he went back outside prepared to kill whoever landed there because he was just not ready to be found out. He said he retrieved his gun from the plane and waited to see what this other plane did. It came flying back over, and Bob waved and the plane tipped its wing at him and then flew on. So Bob was once again free to do whatever he wanted with his victim. He would once again unleash Paula onto the wilderness, letting her think that she had a chance of getting away from him, but instead he just hunted her down and murdered her like he did all of his other victims. Paula's body would be found about 6 months later on September 28th, 1983, once again by 2 hunters, about a mile downstream from Sherry's body. Paula's cause of death was a gunshot wound through the heart from a .223 caliber gun. So police are starting to suspect at this point that they have a serial killer on their hands. It's about time. From what I have discovered in this case is that there was a woman in the Anchorage Police Department who years earlier had tried to tell everybody that she thought there was a serial killer because prostitutes were just always going missing, and they just laughed at her. Nobody really thought women should be in the police department at this point in time anyways, so they just dismissed her as a woman and told her to go home and take care of the house, basically. So if police would have just listened, this would have all stopped many years earlier. In June of 1983, Bob posted an ad in the Sunday Singles, which was a dating column in the local newspaper. His ad stated, "Adventurous male, 42, 5'11", 164 pounds, looking for a lady proud to be a woman, to share sincere and honest attachment. Must like to dance and enjoy social life. Willing to put on jeans? Join me in finding around what's the next bed over the next hill. Enjoy flying. Own plane. Beachcombing, fishing, camping. Life is beautiful and much fuller if shared." And this is how Bob would meet his girlfriend, Karen O'Leary. He was still married to Darla at this time, but she and the children would spend many summers in Arkansas visiting her family. So I'm assuming that's where they were. On June 8th, 1983, he met up with Karen at a local bar and he thought she was nice, so he asked her to go back to his house with him. I don't really know that I think he intended on killing her because he was very careful about not being seen with the women who he murdered in public, but you never know with him. He had a very specific trigger, and this trigger was if the women he was with showed an interest in his money instead of him, then he would murder them, which I think is kind of a little bit contradictory because he would use his money to pick up the women. He would always brag, "Oh, I have my own private airplane. Come fly with me. I'll take you away. Oh, such a great life." And then once they were like, "Oh yeah, I like your money," he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna murder you." You can't have it both ways, buddy. And he asked Karen if she wanted to go for a plane ride. So I mean, we can only assume he had intended on murdering her at this point. And Karen agreed, but it ended up being too windy to take the plane out, so instead, Bob took her back to her house, which honestly could very well be the thing that saved her life. While there, he brought her down to his basement, which was his man cave. He had a bearskin rug on the floor. He had all of his trophies on the walls, and him and Karen started making out in the basement, and then he asked her if she would like to make love on his bearskin rug. Karen declined, and that was that. Bob said he thought she was a nice lady, and he let her go. My theory is that if the women agreed to have sex with him on his bearskin rug, that is when he would decide their fate. He would murder them then, because I'm getting ahead of myself. Just 5 days later, on June 13th, 1983, Bob meets Cindy Paulson, a local prostitute. He drives down to the prostitute area and asks Cindy if she would agree to a blowjob in his car for $200, and she agrees. So she gets in the car with him, and then he pulls his gun. This is when he drove her back to his house, where he would rape and torture her. He tied her up and held her captive for about 5 hours, and then after he got done raping her, he went and took a nap on the couch, leaving her chained up to a post in the basement. Obviously, Cindy was terrified for her life, but she knew that it was not her time to die. So when Bob wakes up, he tells her that he wants to take her to his cabin in the woods just for the weekend, just a little getaway. "I'm gonna bring you back. It'll be fine. I'm not gonna kill you." He handcuffs her and puts her in his car, and she is apparently in the backseat of his car at this point. He's driving her to Merrifield Airport, where he stores his airplane. Once they get there, he tells her that he has to go get the plane ready so he can tie her up in the plane. So she takes this as her opportunity to escape. While Bob's back is to her, Cindy makes a run for it, and Bob pursues after her with his gun in hand. But Cindy is able to make it to 6th Avenue, where a passing by truck sees her and sees that she is very clearly disheveled because she is naked and handcuffed, and he stops to see if she needs any help. She gets in his truck with him. She asked him to drive her back to the Mush Inn, and when she gets there, she goes into the front office and asks the attending clerk if he will call her boyfriend at the Big Timber Motel, and the truck driver, they call him a truck driver. I'm assuming he was just a man in a pickup, because people like to use truck and pickup interchangeably, but to me a truck is a semi. So this man continues on to work, and when he arrives at work, he calls the police to let them know that he had just found a woman naked and running down 6th Avenue. Police then go to the Mush Inn where the man says he left her. There they learn that she is actually at the Big Timber Motel. Upon arriving there, they go to room 101 where they find Cindy Paulson naked and belligerent and just very distressed and upset. After getting her out of the handcuffs and giving her some clothes, police ask if she would be willing to go to the hospital to have a rape kit done. Cindy agrees, and on the way to the hospital, they pass by the Merrill Field Airport where Robert's plane was stored, and she points out the plane to the police officer, and he is able to then call the airport and get the VIN number or something off of the plane, which they are able to run, and this allows police to learn Robert's name and his address. So police go to Bob's house and mention this little incident to him, and of course he plays dumb, saying that he has no idea what they're talking about. He was not with any prostitutes that morning. He agrees to let police into his house, and they go check out his basement, and everything is just how Cindy had said it was. So police confront him with this, and then he admits, yes, I was with a prostitute, but she tried to jump the price on me, and when I refused to pay, she made up this story. So once again, police buy Bob's story and chalk it up to a prostitute trying to jump the price on him and let him go. At this point, Alaska State Troopers have realized that they're in over their head with this serial killer investigation. So they reach out to the FBI to get a psychological profile on a possible suspect. The FBI tells them that they believe the assailant would be a very experienced hunter with very low self-esteem. They even suggest he might have a stutter, so I was like, Bob. They also tell him that he would definitely be keeping trophies of his victims, and it would most likely be jewelry. And some point during this time, an Anchorage police officer goes to the state police with a file on Robert Hansen, and having learned what their psychological profile for this serial killer would probably be, and then getting this information on Robert Hansen, state troopers believe that they have found their guy. So on April 27th, 1983, state troopers get a warrant to search Robert's house, and before they conduct the search, they lure him out of the house by calling him and asking him if he will come down to the police station and answer a few more questions. Robert agrees, and upon entering the interrogation room, he is confronted with maps all over the walls of routes leading back to his house from possible abduction locations, and there are also dozens of very thick folders with his name on it, suggesting that police have been onto him for quite some time, and they're hoping that these tactics will scare him into confessing. But they don't have any luck there. Bob denies everything and requests an attorney, so police end the interview. Meanwhile, they're at his house conducting their search warrant, and his wife and children are there. His children are obviously very terrified. Police go down to the basement where they're not really finding anything, and this is at first very disappointing for them, but then they decide to go check out the attic. And when they go in the attic, they find all of his guns, including his .223 Ruger mini rifle, which is the murder weapon. And they pull back some insulation, and what do they find? A big bag of jewelry. At this point, they're 1000% sure that they have the right guy. They determine that the jewelry, in fact, did belong to many of their victims, and they cannot question Robert about any of this at this time because he has requested an attorney. So they're just kind of left with that, and they charge him with murder. I'm not really sure whose they charged him with initially. Police also found aviation maps in his house with various X's on them, and at first they just disregarded them, assuming maybe these are places he likes to go hunting or something. But then one of the officers starts thinking about it a little bit more, and he thinks to himself, I think these X's really mean something. So he goes to the man who found Joanna Messina's body and says, can you tell me on this map where you found Joanna? And the guy says, oh yeah, sure, but you already have it marked. And he says, I didn't mark this map. Robert Hansen marked this map. So police can only conclude from that all of the X's mark a body. On February 19th, 1984, Robert requested for his minister to come and talk to him at the prison, and while there, he asks his minister what sins God would forgive, and just 2 days later, he confesses to the cops that, yes, I murdered Joanna Messina, Paula Golding, and Eclutna Annie, maybe. He only confesses to the women who he knows cops know about. And cops say, okay, and what else? And Robert says, oh, that's it. I didn't kill anybody else. And they say, oh, but what about this map we found? And that's when Robert realizes he is caught. Robert would go on to confess to 17 murders, although there are 21 X's on the map, leading police to conclude that there are 21 bodies. But after the 17 confessions, Robert refuses to give them any more information. On February 27th, 1984, Robert receives a 461-year sentence, plus life, for the murders of Sherry Morrow, Paula Golding, Eclutna Annie, and Joanna Messina, plus the kidnapping and rape of Cindy Paulson. Using Hansen's aviation maps with the X's marked on them, police are able to discover 7 more of the grave sites between April and May of 1984. And on August 21st, 2014, at the age of 75, Robert Hansen died in prison of natural causes. The remaining 6 victims that Robert confessed to killing have never been found. This is definitely a wild story. And I think that police would have and should have been able to catch him sooner if they would have just paid attention to the evidence and listened to the women who were telling him he was doing all these horrible things to them. If they would have just convicted him longer back in 72 for kidnapping and attempting to kidnap 2 women, I think that a lot of women could be alive today if police would have just done their job properly. That's just my thoughts on this. What do you guys think about this story? Pretty crazy, huh? Yeah. Let me know in the comments what you think about this type of video. And like this video if you would like me to continue doing videos like this. Let me know in the comments who you would like to hear me talk about next, if you would like me to talk about anybody next. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!